A shelter dog was left heartbroken when his brother was adopted, leaving him all alone. But just when it seemed all hope was lost, something incredible happened that will leave you reaching for tissues. One particularly chilly November morning, a shelter's tranquility was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into the gravel driveway. Jennifer Echelman-Doty, a long-time volunteer with a soft spot for strays, stepped outside to greet the visitor. As she approached the car, her eyes widened at the sight of two dogs huddled together in the back seat. They were heeler mixes, their fur matted and dirty. But it wasn't their appearance that caught her attention. It was the way they clung to each other, as if the world outside their little bubble didn't exist. The car door opened, and a middle-aged man stepped out, his face set in a hard line. "I'm dropping them off," he announced bluntly. "I got a new job that's taking up too much of my time, and I can't keep them anymore. They've been good dogs, but I don't have the space or energy for them now." After signing the necessary papers, he promptly left without looking back. Jennifer was used to it, yet it never got easier to see people abandon their pets. The dogs were brought into the warmth of the shelter, where they were given food, water, and a thorough examination. As the staff worked to clean them up, it became clear that these two were more than just a pair of strays. They were inseparable. Wherever one went, the other followed, their movements synchronized like a well-rehearsed dance. The staff, touched by their obvious bond, decided to name them Bonnie and Clyde. Over the next few days, Bonnie and Clyde began to settle into their new surroundings. Despite the trauma they must have endured, evident from their general state and skittish behavior, they seemed to draw strength from each other's presence. Jennifer couldn't help but notice how they thrived in each other's company. They played together, chased each other around the yard, and even curled up side by side when it was time to sleep. Their bond was unlike anything the staff had seen before, and it quickly became a source of joy and inspiration. One afternoon, as Jennifer watched the pair frolicking in the play area, she was struck by a thought. What if Bonnie and Clyde were separated? The idea sent a shiver down her spine. She had seen how attached they were, how one couldn't seem to function without the other. It was then that she made a vow. She would do everything in her power to ensure they were adopted together. But as the days passed, Jennifer began to notice something strange. While many visitors to the shelter were immediately drawn to Bonnie and Clyde's playful nature, there were whispers of concern among the staff. Some speculated that such a strong bond between two dogs might be off-putting to potential adopters, who might prefer a single pet that could bond with them instead. The shelter manager even hinted that if it came down to it, they might have to consider adopting them out separately to increase their chances. A few days later, the shelter, bustling with activity, greeted a family whose eyes immediately locked onto Clyde. The father, with a discerning eye, admired Clyde's sturdy build and calm demeanor, while the children were captivated by his playful nature. They had come looking for one dog, and to them, Clyde was the perfect fit. Jennifer Echelman-Doty, who had grown especially fond of the inseparable pair, approached the family with a gentle smile. "Clyde's an amazing dog," she began, trying to steer the conversation. "But you should know he's really close to his sister Bonnie. They'd been through so much together." The mother of the family glanced at Bonnie, who was quietly watching from a corner of the room, her eyes reflecting a mixture of hope and fear. "We can only take one," the mother said, her tone apologetic but firm. "We don't have the space or resources for two dogs." Jennifer's heart sank as the family's decision solidified. Despite her efforts to highlight the bond between the siblings, the family was resolute. They completed the adoption paperwork, and soon Clyde was being led out the door. He looked back at Bonnie, tail-wagging, unaware that this goodbye might be their last. Bonnie, however, understood immediately. The shelter dog whimpered and cried over losing her brother, inconsolable. Her eyes, once full of life, now mirrored a deep sadness that the shelter staff couldn't ignore. Jennifer knelt beside her, gently stroking her fur, but Bonnie didn't respond. That night, the shelter was unusually quiet. The dogs, sensing the somber mood, were subdued. Bonnie, who used to curl up beside Clyde on their shared bed, now lay alone. She burrowed her head into the blankets, as if trying to hide from the reality that her brother was gone. The emptiness beside her was a stark reminder of the bond that had been severed. Jennifer stayed late that night, keeping Bonnie company in the dimly lit shelter. She whispered soft reassurances, but they seemed to drift into the void, unheard and unheeded. Bonnie's eyes remained fixed on the door, as if willing Clyde to return. The once lively dog, who had been so full of energy, now seemed lost in a world of her own where only her brother's presence could bring her back. The next morning, Jennifer and the shelter staff gathered to discuss Bonnie's plight. They knew that if they didn't act quickly, Bonnie's depression could worsen. It was then that they decided to share Bonnie's story on social media, hoping to reach someone who might be willing to take her in. Jennifer crafted a heartfelt post, sharing the details of Bonnie's situation and her deep bond with Clyde. She included a picture of Bonnie curled up on her bed, her eyes reflecting the loneliness that had taken hold. With a deep breath, Jennifer wrote a heartfelt caption, pouring out Bonnie's story in a way that she hoped would touch hearts. She hit post and watched as the image, accompanied by Bonnie's tale, began to circulate online. The response was immediate. Within hours, the post had gone viral, shared by thousands, commented on by people from across the country. The outpouring of sympathy was overwhelming, with messages of support flooding the shelter's inbox. Yet, despite the attention, there was cautious optimism among the staff. They had been here before, hopes raised only to be dashed when no real solution emerged. Still, they held on to a sliver of hope that this time things might be different. The next morning, as the staff prepared for another day, a car pulled into the shelter's parking lot earlier than usual. Jennifer, still groggy from a night of restless sleep, watched as a woman stepped out, her expression a mix of determination and anticipation. The woman introduced herself as Braden Ruth, a local dog lover who had recently lost her older dog, Tally. She explained that she had seen Bonnie's story the night before and had felt an immediate connection. She'd have been searching for a companion for her other dog, and something about Bonnie's story had struck a chord deep within her. Braden's presence was a beacon of hope in what had been a long, dark tunnel for Bonnie. Jennifer led her to the kennel where Bonnie lay, still curled up in her usual spot. As Braden approached, Bonnie's ears perked up slightly, a reaction Jennifer hadn't seen in days. There was a spark of recognition in Bonnie's eyes, as if she sensed that something significant was about to happen. Braden knelt down, speaking softly to Bonnie, her voice gentle and soothing. She extended a hand, allowing Bonnie to sniff her fingers before lightly stroking her fur. To everyone's astonishment, Bonnie slowly lifted her head, her eyes locking onto Braden's with an intensity that was both heartbreaking and hopeful. For the first time in weeks, Bonnie moved closer to someone, her body language showing a glimmer of trust. The connection was instant and undeniable. Braden could feel it, as could Jennifer, who watched with bated breath, hoping that this was the moment they had all been waiting for. Braden continued to speak to Bonnie, sharing stories of her late dog, Bumper, and her current one, Tally. Bonnie listened, her eyes never leaving Braden's face, as if she understood every word. Jennifer stepped back, allowing Braden and Bonnie to bond without interruption. It was clear that Braden was the person Bonnie had been waiting for, the one who could pull her out of her despair and give her the love and companionship she so desperately needed. Braden, too, seemed to realize this. The visit had turned from an inquiry into a certainty. Bonnie was meant to be a part of her family. As the two continued to bond, Jennifer's heart swelled with a mix of relief and joy. She knew that Bonnie had found her person, someone who would love and care for her as deeply as Clyde once had. The staff watched as Bonnie's transformation began before their eyes, her body relaxing, her eyes brightening, and her tail beginning to wag ever so slightly. It was the first sign of happiness they had seen in Bonnie since Clyde's departure, and it was nothing short of a miracle. Braden then agreed to finalize the adoption papers. Holding Bonnie's leash, she knelt down to the dog's level. "From now on, you're Ember," she whispered softly, a name chosen to symbolize a new chapter, a spark of hope after the darkness. Bonnie, now Ember, seemed to understand. Her tail wagged gently, and she leaned into Braden, as if accepting her new name and the promise it carried. The shelter staff surrounded them, each taking a moment to say their farewells. Jennifer, who had been Bonnie's most steadfast supporter, wiped away a tear as she handed Braden the final paperwork. "Take good care of her," Jennifer said, her voice thick with emotion. "She deserves all the happiness in the world." Braden nodded, her own eyes glistening with tears. "I promise," she replied, her voice filled with conviction. As Braden and Ember drove away, the shelter staff stood outside, waving until the car disappeared down the road. There was a sense of closure, a feeling that after all the heartache, things were finally falling into place. The journey had been long and difficult, but Ember was on her way to a better life. Arriving at her new home, Ember hesitated for a moment as she stepped out of the car, her paws touching unfamiliar ground. Braden led her inside, where Tally, Braden's other dog, was waiting. The two dogs eyed each other cautiously, their movements tentative as they circled one another. Braden held her breath, hoping that this introduction would go smoothly. At first, there was a palpable tension in the air. Tally, still grieving the loss of her former companion, was unsure of this new arrival. Ember, sensing Tally's hesitation, kept her distance, her ears perked up in curiosity, but her body language cautious. For a brief moment, Braden feared that the transition might be more difficult than she had anticipated. But then a surprising twist occurred. Tally, after a few moments of uncertainty, took a tentative step toward Ember and gave her a gentle nudge with her nose. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. Ember responded in kind, her tail wagging slowly at first, then faster as she realized that Tally was welcoming her. Within minutes, the two dogs were cautiously playing together, their initial wariness giving way to a burgeoning friendship. Braden watched the scene unfold, tears welling up in her eyes. It was a sight she had longed to see. Ember, once lost and alone, finding a place where she belonged. The bond between the two dogs grew stronger with each passing hour, and by the end of the day, they were inseparable. Tally, who had been so withdrawn, seemed to have found new life in Ember, and the two became fast friends. Over the next few days, Ember settled into her new home. Braden made sure to spend extra time with her, reinforcing the bond they had begun to form. Ember quickly became attached to both Braden and Tally, following them around the house, her tail wagging with newfound energy. It was as if a light had been switched on inside her, and the playful, loving dog she had once been began to emerge once more. But just as things were starting to feel perfect, something happened that disrupted the peace and harmony they had found. One morning, Ember seemed unusually quiet, her movements slow, and her eyes lacking their usual spark. Braden, concerned, took her to the vet, fearing that the stress of the recent changes might have affected her health. The vet ran some tests, and after what felt like an eternity, he confirmed that Ember was healthy but likely still adjusting to our new environment. The vet suggested giving her more time and space to fully acclimate. Relieved that it was nothing serious, Braden redoubled her efforts to make Ember feel at home. She introduced new routines, taking Ember and Tally on longer walks, and even arranging play dates with other dogs in the neighborhood. Gradually, Ember's confidence returned, and with it, her joy for life. Weeks had passed since Ember found her new home, and the transformation in her was nothing short of miraculous. Gone was the forlorn, despondent dog who had once lain curled up in a lonely corner of the shelter. In her place was a vibrant, joyful companion brimming with life and curiosity. Braden watched with amazement as Ember's true personality emerged, one full of playfulness, affection, and an unmistakable zest for life. Ember's days were now filled with adventure and love, whether it was racing Tally through the yard, exploring the nearby woods on their daily walks, or simply lounging in the sun. Ember embraced every moment with newfound energy. She had become the heart of the household, bringing a sense of happiness that Braden hadn't realized was missing until Ember arrived. The bond between Ember and Tally grew stronger with each passing day, their friendship a testament to the healing power of love and companionship. Braden, proud of Ember's progress, began sharing updates on social media. She posted pictures and videos of Ember's playful antics, along with stories of how she had settled into her new life. To Braden's surprise, these posts quickly gained traction, with people from all over responding to Ember's journey. The story of the dog who had once lost everything but had found her way back to happiness touched many hearts, inspiring countless others to consider adopting pets in need of a second chance. One day, as Braden was scrolling through the comments on one of her posts, she noticed a message that made her pause. It was from the family who had adopted Clyde, Ember's brother. The shelter had shared Braden's updates on their own social media, and the family had seen them and were deeply moved by Ember's story. They mentioned how Clyde had also settled well into their home, but there was a note of longing in their message, a recognition that Clyde might still miss the sister he had once been inseparable from. What happened next will bring tears to your eyes. They suggested a reunion, a chance for the siblings to see each other again. Braden's heart skipped a beat at the thought. The idea of reuniting Ember and Clyde was both exciting and nerve-wracking. She worried about how Ember would react, whether the reunion would be joyous or bittersweet. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that this could be the final piece in Ember's journey of healing. She quickly responded, agreeing to arrange a playdate between the two dogs. The day of the reunion arrived, and Braden could feel the tension in the air as they drove to the park where the meeting would take place. Ember, sensing something special was about to happen, was unusually quiet in the back seat. When they arrived, the family with Clyde was already there, waiting anxiously. Clyde, who had grown into a strong and healthy dog, was sitting calmly beside them, his eyes scanning the surroundings. As soon as Ember stepped out of the car, Clyde's demeanor changed. His tail began to wag furiously, and he let out an excited bark. Ember, catching sight of Clyde, froze for a moment, as if trying to process what she was seeing. Then, without hesitation, she bolted towards him, her tail wagging with the same intensity. The two dogs collided in a flurry of fur and joy, barking, sniffing, and playfully nipping at each other. It was as if no time had passed since they were last together. The reunion was everything Braden had hoped for and more, and she couldn't hold back the tears as she watched the siblings reconnect. The family stood by, moved by the sight of Bonnie and Clyde, now Ember and Clyde, reuniting after so long. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that the bond between them was still as strong as ever. The playdate lasted for hours, the two dogs running and playing as if they were puppies again. By the end of the day, the families had agreed to make these playdates a regular occurrence, ensuring that Ember and Clyde would remain a part of each other's lives. Fortunately, they lived fairly close to each other, and keeping in touch wouldn't be too difficult. As they drove home, Ember lay in the back seat, exhausted but content. Braden glanced back at her, a deep sense of fulfillment washing over her. She knew that Ember's journey had come full circle, from the depths of despair to the heights of happiness. Ember had not only found her forever home, but had also rekindled the bond with her brother. It was a story that had touched many lives, including Braden's. That evening, as Braden sat on the porch watching the sunset, she reflected on how much Ember had brought to her life. The once quiet house was now filled with laughter and the pitter-patter of paws. Ember had not only healed from her past, but had also helped Braden and Tally heal in ways they hadn't anticipated. The connection they shared was something Braden knew she would cherish for the rest of her life. Ember, now resting at Braden's feet, looked up with eyes full of trust and love. Braden reached down, gently scratching behind Ember's ears, and whispered, "Thank you for finding me." It was a simple phrase, but it carried the weight of all the emotions Braden felt.